College football nerds here talking preseason college football action. I think it's 28 days, Josh, until week one, and we are here just talking ball this week. Josh and I are going to try to keep this conversational and just have a nice flowing discussion about some college football topics. A few things that we're going to try to get in. We'll see, time permitting, but we're going to talk about that Colorado Buffaloes move back to the Big 12. We're going to talk a little bit about championship games, conference championship games, whether or not we should get rid of them. I know they're not going to, but it's a good discussion. Maybe a little playoff discussion in there. And we're going to do some previews. We're going to try to get to Texas, LSU, and Michigan in this one. And always, if you don't want to watch the whole thing, we will chop some of this up. And you can also listen to us on the podcast. All right, Josh, the big news this week was the fact that Colorado has decided to take their ball and move to the Big 12. And it seems like there's just this tension of impending doom with the Pac-12, which is now the Pac-9. And there's talks that another team will join Colorado. It looks like the Big 12 is trying to poach one more Pac-12 team. And if not, they're going to move down to maybe someone like a Memphis or some other thing. But just in general, Josh, I might upset some people in saying this, but I want to say it and get your reaction. This was the big news topic of the week. And every time there's conference realignment, it's like a bombshell and it gets a lot of traction and a lot of eyeballs. This is the first one where I'm like, man, I don't care. Like, I care, and I do care about Colorado football. I care about Pac-12 football staying healthy for the sport. But in general, like, this one just didn't land with me like some of the others have. And I don't think it's about brand names or anything else like that. I think there's something else going on here. What do you think about that?
I think the simplest reason you can give for that is this is a football team that hasn't had a winning record in 6 years, right? Dating back to 2016. And moreover, that 2016 season is the first time they'd had a winning record since 2005. It's 18 years, guys. I just don't know, for as much of a storied program as they are, how much Colorado moves the needle for anybody these days outside of Deion Sanders. And that's kind of the weird thing with the expansion in my mind is it's exciting or relevant because Deion's there and they're investing money in the program. There's a lot of money in the state of Colorado. But at the same time, as a program in anything resembling modern history, it's not a relevant program. They were really bad last year, even with Sanders and as many transfers as they have. I expect them to be really bad this year. So why am I supposed to be upbeat? In a weird way, I mean, do you agree with me on this? Like Colorado, if you're just talking the Big 12 in the abstract, right? The Big 12 and what they're going to be. Colorado feels almost like the worst addition that they've gotten, even compared to the 4 teams they just added, which were all G5 teams. I mean, do you feel the same way on that?
I think that it's partly what you already touched on, though, and I agree. But I think it's the Deion Sanders heat and the assumption, because there's a lot of assumption that he's going to have them be a winning program in year one, and it's possible. But I think that there's a lot of positive PR around the program. They sold out the spring game. I think they sold out all their season tickets. So there's a lot of positive momentum that might only have a small window to jump on that. And they're parlaying that into this Big 12 move. And obviously they've been there before, so it fits. But yeah, it's a little weird because of what you just said. They only had one winning season while they were in the Pac-12. So I don't know. I think that brands like Houston, like UCF have won more even against Power 5 teams, but I think that at some point you're talking about a P5 brand, whether they're a P5 quality team or not.
Yeah, it's one more school to add to the list. And this gets into a weird thing we talk about, though, with 9-game conference schedules and whatnot. At what point are you adding quality, and at what point are you watering it down? And I felt like UCF, Cincinnati, even certainly Houston, BYU to a certain extent, added to the Big 12, right? They added something new. They were teams that have been good when teams in the Big 12 weren't as good. It makes me feel like the champion coming out of the Big 12 should be theoretically more competitive. I don't know what the trade-off is there, adding those 4 and losing Texas and Oklahoma, but at least for a year, you've got a more competitive conference. Colorado, the problem is it's a lot like when the Big Ten added Rutgers, and this has been a soapbox for me for a long time, to the ire of everyone that feels like we're too negative. Uh, when you add Rutgers to the conference schedule, yeah, it's another conference game, but it's a conference game you're going to probably win, and a lot of times you might be replacing a traditional Big 12 or Big 10 team with Colorado or Rutgers. And yeah, I don't know. The interesting thing to me too with Colorado is the momentum. You talk about momentum, but let's run through their schedule a bit for people that aren't familiar. They actually open the year at TCU, which is a lot harder than they probably anticipated when they scheduled that a few years ago. They play Nebraska. They play Colorado State, who's typically a pretty good out of conference team. That's their out of conference slate. At TCU, Nebraska, Colorado State. Not easy. Then they start the conference play by playing at Oregon and then Southern Cal at home. Then they play at Arizona State, Stanford, at UCLA, Oregon State, which is supposed to be pretty good this year, Arizona, at Washington State, and then end at Utah. So, man, Colorado could be a pretty good team and easily in 4-8. And so it's just hard for me to feel like that we're going to come out of 2023 feeling like this is a monumental thing for the Big 12. It seems almost like an aside, given the schedule, given everything else. Even though they could be a good team, even though Sanders may improve the program, there's just so many things going against it. But I think the bigger thing really for me is it's not so much about what the Big 12's adding, right? It's about the realities for the Pac-12 now that they lose USC, UCLA, and Colorado, and you're only left with like you said, a handful of teams left.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to Colorado for scheduling 2 Power 5 teams out of conference when they already have a 9-game conference schedule. To them is due a lot of credit. It's interesting because 2 of the 4 additions to the Big 12 don't play Power 5 teams out of conference. So they have kind of 3 baked-in wins. Like Houston's got UTSA, Rice, and Sam Houston. But one of the things that you've noted is these teams that are going to the Big 12, they've done well, but they haven't done well with a full conference slate of Power 5 opponents. And so from that standpoint, it'll be interesting to watch the Big 12. And then from the Pac-12, it's this awkward thing. It's the same thing in the Big 12 with like Texas and Oklahoma being there this year, right? And Colorado and whomever's leaving with Colorado being in the Pac-12 this year. It's like you're already divorced, but you still have to live in the same house because you can't afford an apartment. So it's kind of tough. The Pac-12 is looking to backfill with teams that aren't Power 5. I've heard some people say that they're trying to poach a Power 5 team. But, Josh, we've also heard that they're going to have a TV deal for 6 months now. We've heard that. So I think part of this was Colorado left for guaranteed money. But what the Pac-12 has to do right now if they want to survive this whole thing is, 1, they've got to add a team. I don't care if it's a Power 5 team or not. They got to add somebody. And 2, they've got to get a TV deal. And I know that's hard to do when you don't have the whole foundation of who you've got in your conference out there, but they got to do something. Josh, slightly changing the direction of this conversation about this realignment, but not so much. You touched on it, and I want you to react to this. I'm going to tweet about it whenever they announce whoever else is going to the Big 12. You touched on the fact that Texas and Oklahoma are leaving. They've filled it with some decent G5 brand names. They've backfilled with it. There's rumor that Arizona is going with Colorado to the Big 12. If that's the case, then all the teams that the Big 12 have added to replace Texas and Oklahoma, their record against Power 5 teams last year was 6-26, and I think 4 of those 6 wins were against teams with a losing record. To me, there's also an issue with the Big 12 in that they're trading powerful brand names for potentially mediocre teams, and I have some concern there as well of it being just a rebranded G5 conference.
Yeah, well, first off, I think the Pac-12, they're going to get a TV deal anytime now. I heard from Larry Scott that if they just kept him on, he was about 3 days away from signing Blockbuster to a marquee VHS trading system where you could get tapes of all the games. It was going to be a landmark, innovative thing. No, the the reality for the sport constantly changes, and like Blockbuster, a lot of things that were cool and shiny may not be as cool or shiny today as they were yesterday. I kind of wonder, to what extent that's happening with some of these programs. UCF is a big draw for a lot of people. It is, in terms of local enrollment, I believe still the largest undergraduate university in the U.S. So they sitting there in talent-rich Central Florida with a huge group of students. They've got a lot of momentum, and everybody feels like they're a school that could blow up. This gets into the reality of whether or not, just being a big school with a lot of students and talent-rich area necessarily guarantees success if you're not an established program, right? Are they going to be able to pass UF or FSU? And it's easy to say, well, Florida and FSU weren't very good, but I would always counter, Florida and FSU blew up when the state of Florida blew up. And what I mean by that is, you want to go back in history, pretty simple. This thing called air conditioning got invented, and the state of Florida's population doubled and then doubled again. And when the population exploded is when Florida and Florida State got really good. There's no magic to why Miami was suddenly dominant in the 80s when they were nobody before. I don't know why people don't put two and two together, but just go look at the population graphs of the state of Florida, and you'll realize really quickly why that happened. So the idea is, well, UCF's going to do the same thing. I don't know. I mean, there's so many schools now that are already established, that are already drawing from that region, and now recruiting is so much more national, that you're just assuming that UCF team in 2017 and 2018, that they're just going to be able to reproduce that. When they had sort of a magic thing going with, a lot of under-recruited guys. Was it Mackenzie Milton was the quarterback there, right, before he got hurt, that really kind of took them to another level. And then since 2018, they really haven't done that again. The same sort of thing has happened with Houston. They played the game of bringing in the big-time offensive mind, and that didn't necessarily work. So now he's at West Virginia. I don't know how much these programs are going to be able to succeed at this level. And everyone's going to say, oh, you joined a P5 program, and that just pulls you up. The same argument everybody makes about the reality that the playoff has been chalk heavy. Well, if we just expand the playoff, then the lesser teams that get included are going to get boosts. My point has always been, well, Michigan State made the playoffs, and they didn't do anything as a result of that. So same kind of Washington. Yeah, I mean, Washington's another example. Made the playoffs, didn't appear again. They haven't been nearly as good as they were. I don't know how much of a boon any of this is. I don't think it is a boon to join a Power 5 conference if you lose a lot of games. So this is one of the things I think people can comment on too, especially. I mean, do you think BYU, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati are going to be successful day one? And I think Cincinnati's going to be the one everyone points to. But even them, 2 years ago they made the playoff. They had a super senior laden roster. They had two of the best corners in football. Sauce, I think, may have been the best corner in football. Even though people kind of knew it, I don't think they appreciated it. They had a tremendous senior quarterback. They had a lot of guys around the roster, some transfers, like a running back that filled in. Is that a repeatable thing? And certainly, is it a consistent thing? I don't know. I mean, what do people feel about it? Because to me, I got a lot of questions about how that's going to pan out. And remind you, at the end of the day, everybody can't go 8-4 in the same conference. Somebody's got to have a losing record. Is it going to be the four new teams, or are they going to hand losses to the pre-existing teams? Because one or the other has to happen.
I think that if you're a Central Florida or a BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, you point to TCU's success. Everybody's going to remember the blowout game in the national championship game last year, but TCU had an awesome season. That was a really good football team. They were talent limited, and they won games on preparation, especially the Michigan game. They had a month to prepare, but that to their credit, right? And so seeing Kansas State, a team that won nothing until Bill Snyder got there, seeing those two teams at the top of the conference when you had brand names existing in Texas and Oklahoma there, somewhat floundering, not reaching their potential, that gives Central Florida a real reason to say, I can come in and be successful there. And I don't necessarily know that they're wrong. I do think there's a challenge when you have to do it week in and week out, but TCU figured it out. I think it comes down to coaching and being in a talent-rich area, which that's what concerns me a little bit about BYU, though I will say that they've been P5 light for a while. So they actually have a little bit of advantage over some of the others in that they've played more Power 5 games week in and week out on average throughout the course of the season. So they're a little more prepared for it. But Josh, let me spin this in a what might sound really negative but possibly positive way. What if we just, I hate to say this because I love West Coast football, but what if we just write off the Pac-12 and assume that it's going to be a casualty of conference realignment, super conferences, whatever, and let's say everybody kind of bail and go where you can, musical chairs. Is that really something that could potentially save West Coast football? I mean, you'd have West Coast football, but it would just be a little bit scattered among different conferences. So you wouldn't have this coherent Pac-12, but you have teams like USC and UCLA or Colorado, which is not really West Coast, in conferences that have big revenue deals, TV deals, advertising deals, NIL capabilities. Whereas if they'd stayed in a floundering conference and got a really weak TV deal, they actually would have been less competitive and might have kept them where they were.
So rather than California like breaking off from the U.S. and floating into the Pacific, you're sort of theorizing that California gets right. They get chopped into little chunks, and some are sent to the Midwest, and some are sent to the South, and then probably stopped at the border and sent back. But tried to like just redistribute them to the other conferences around the country. It's an interesting idea, but I do think you're onto something, which is everyone knows, whether they want to admit it or not, that West Coast football hasn't been very good in recent memory. And we see that a lot of times in bowl season. We see it in out-of-conference play, right? When Oregon goes and plays a mediocre Auburn team and loses and then goes and wins their conference, that's a bad sign. Or I guess it was Washington maybe one year that did that. Yeah, memory's failing me here. Well, it happened, I guess, both of those teams. I can't remember which one did the better record. But I think if they were to actually play in the other conferences or have more intermixing, then suddenly people are more interested, right? I certainly think more Big Ten fans are going to watch USC and UCLA with them in the Big Ten. I think USC and UCLA's ratings are going to go up. But in a weird way, I also think fans in LA that are USC fans are going to care more about USC when they're playing Ohio State and Michigan. And they may not fully understand that or realize it now, but I think they're going to understand it a lot better when they get in the reality of we're in a real conference, we're in tough games, and we follow the sport and it's more interesting and the football's better versus the empty stadium garbage that currently is about half the Pac-12, right? And the same deal, like Colorado going to the Big 12. And let's say, for the sake of argument, something like Arizona State goes over there. Now you're playing other schools that actually care about the sport, and they're going to care about you. And then now you watch, maybe it gives you a reason to watch some of these other programs that do play good football. I'm being salty today. That might actually get you interested. So in the current reality where the bad teams in the West are only playing the bad teams in the West, if you're a serious football fan, unless you're watching your own team, I don't know how much you really care to watch. And if you're a team in the Midwest, South, East Coast, I don't know how much reason you have to watch a West Coast game that isn't a Southern Cal game. So at least then you got reasons to watch those teams. So yeah, I actually think you're right. That might actually be the best thing for the West Coast, is to be, put into bankruptcy and sent to all their creditors, which are the other conferences. But I don't know. It's probably a pipe dream, but it looks less and less like a pipe dream because it is kind of what's really happening, right?
All right, you got anything else on this one?
No, I don't think so. We beat up the Pac-12 and the Big 12 enough. We'll let them be for a little while.
I do think that we got to figure out, what we're going to do since we're solving everybody's problems. What we're going to do with Oregon and Washington, because those are two brands that would be coveted by other conferences. But also, Josh, we're running into a little bit of a problem where these conferences are getting full, and it's creating logistical issues where you have 9-game conference seasons, but when you have 16 or 18 or 20 teams in a conference, there's only fractional teams playing a fraction of the conference every year. But we're doing this thing where we're also expanding to 12 teams in the playoffs. And I put a tweet out earlier this week, and I was like, I know y'all are going to say no. And if initially, reflexively, you're going to say this is a terrible idea. But I said, should we consider maybe getting rid of the conference championship games? And it's tough because on one hand, you kind of need that when you have 16, 18 teams in a conference because you want 1 and 2 to play one another. But this is becoming a problem for two reasons. One, I think that you've got teams that are going to play a rivalry game, then a conference championship game, and then 4 good teams in a row in the playoffs if they make it that far. That's a lot to ask. But 2, Josh, this is the one I want you to really comment on. Everybody's killing Ryan Day for saying this week they need to think about moving Michigan versus Ohio State to a different point in the season so they don't play each other back-to-back in the conference championship game. Think about this. What if they play each other regular season, back-to-back, both make the playoffs, play for a 3rd time in the playoffs? There's a potential problem here nobody's talking about.
Our MO as a channel for a long time, I think, was being anti-playoff expansion, right? And one of the things that we often talked about was this unacknowledged reality that you're going to have more rematches. And I know a couple of years ago when we actually broke down what the playoff schedule was going to look like, it was like 3 or 4 games in the first 2 rounds, if chalk won, were going to be rematches. This is an example of it. You talk about the kick 6 game, right? That's always my big example of something that shook college football world. That game absolutely would not have mattered in a 12-team playoff. In fact, it barely matters in a 4-team playoff. But once you go to 12-team, who cares, right? In that final game, and the chance that Alabama and Auburn play again in 2 games is pretty high. Now, some people will say, well, that's exciting. We get to see the rematch. But I think you miss how much it takes away from the first game. And like you said, if you got to play 3 times, okay, now you really don't care. And it's not like a best of 3 series, right? It's just the last one's the only one that actually matters. And the thing I'll push back on too is we talk about Ohio State, Michigan, and that game will be interesting or exciting or big ratings because people care about that rivalry. I think it's a lot more sometimes the games between teams that you don't necessarily think are going to matter but do, like TCU, Texas. Well, if TCU and Texas are going to have to play each other in a rematch and then another rematch, you don't necessarily care, right? TCU, Kansas State last year, they had to play them twice. And that second game ended up mattering. But if you knew that TCU was going to be in anyway and you knew Kansas State was going to be in anyway, how much do you care about that conference championship game? I think, going back to your original point with all this, I think there is a reality now that if we are going to have this expanded playoff, we're going to deal with all the trade-offs, I would at least probably prefer to see the conference championships games go away. And why is that? Well, I don't really need to see who number 1 and number 2 in a conference is if we're going to put the top 4 teams in a playoff from the SEC. I'm fine with them being 1, 2, 3, and 4 because the chances are they're probably going to end up playing if they really are the 2 best teams in the country, they're going to play each other in the playoff at some point anyway, and that issue is going to get settled. And especially in a situation where you've got 16 teams in a conference, which means schedules are going to get way more lopsided. Georgia's schedule, guys, as much as we talk about 2023 being easy, their schedule in 2024 is freaking brutal if you haven't looked at it. I just let them get the record they have, let them earn or not earn their way to the playoff. And then when we get to the playoff, put the top 4 teams in, and the best team in the conference is going to be the team that goes the furthest. And that lets you start maybe the playoffs a little earlier, which you're going to need to with earlier rounds. I don't like doing that. I'd rather, personally, the conference championships be a little bit of a filter into the playoffs like they are now. But if you're going to have this expanded playoff world and losing the conference championship really doesn't mean whether or not you get in, yeah, I'd rather it exist. And let me say one more thing before I let you comment on it, because this is something you've talked about a lot, is the automatic qualifiers. I mean, the main reason you have a conference championship game in this scenario is because you need to have a conference champion to get that automatic slot in the playoff. But if you got 12 teams, if you're good enough to be in the playoff, you ought to be in the top 12, right? Like, we shouldn't be excluding anybody of any worth in 12 teams just on pure ranking. So I just don't understand what the point is at that level.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree that it'd be tough because you'd have this sense of finality if you don't have the conference championship game. But I think those auto bids are the logic around that. Now that the Pac-12 is getting blown up, the logic of auto bids is going to go differently, I believe. I think before 2024 happens, they're going to renegotiate at the table because at least two of the real 4 conferences, Power 4, didn't want them at all. So I think that we're going to fix that. collectively. But Josh, I'm curious. Like, I want to turn this like immediately back to you because we had this scenario play out recently, and I don't want to demean Alabama's 2021 SEC championship. That's hardware they earned. It's a big deal to win the SEC, obviously, but for the players and fans of that Alabama team, do they remember more the SEC championship that they won or finishing the season losing to Georgia? Like, let's start there. What do you think the answer to that is?
I think the answer is they probably remember losing the national title a lot more than they remember winning the SEC championship.
Right. And then the flip side of that, which is also kind of tough, is, I don't mind rematches so much, but I don't love the concept of rematch from a conference championship game. Like, when Alabama and LSU played in 2011, there was a lot of time between them playing one another. There wasn't that much time. There's only one game in between them playing one another in 21/22. But yeah, I think that to a man, they'd tell you, that loss to Georgia really stuck in our brain, and that's what we remember, even though we got the hardware. Can we be honest about that collectively and say that, like, right now the conference championship is a big deal in most scenarios, but maybe we do this, Josh. Maybe let's spin this a little bit. Maybe we only have conference championships in certain years for certain situations. I think that would never happen. I think they want the money, but maybe we come up with a set of conditions where this is when you have to play the game and this is when you don't, because what I fear is going to happen is once teams realize that they can sit their best players against Georgia and still make the playoffs, they'd rather those best players play in a home-hosted game against the 12th best team than to get beaten up against Georgia, probably lose, and just kind of put all their chips in that opportunity to play them in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm sure when everybody thinks the Big 12 last year, everybody's immediate thought is, oh yeah, Kansas State was the Big 12 champion, right? Right? I mean, no, everybody thinks TCU.
Nobody thinks
right?
that.
Right? Everybody thinks TCU. I mean, does anyone even care if they're not a Kansas State fan that Kansas State won the Big 12? Do they even
Josh,
remember?
you think it so much that you got called out because our first video this year, you actually said, it was just kind of a Freudian slip, that TCU won the Big 12, and you meant they were the representative in the playoffs.
Yeah. And it was a Freudian slip, but that's the reality of it. So, I don't know. One of the wrinkles here really is the current format of the 12-team playoff. The fact that, and I think a lot of people that follow us know this, but not, especially in the broader world of college football, they don't understand it. The top 6 champions are guaranteed slots. And then those are the teams that get the byes in round 1. It does not matter where they're ranked. It does not matter who they lost to. They're the only ones that can get the byes. So right now the conference championships games exist largely because of that artificial world. And again, like we talked about last season, who are the conference champions? It's Utah and Kansas State, right? Like, it's not TCU. Ohio State didn't win their conference. They can't be ranked ahead of Utah or Kansas State in that model. It's really screwed up. And I think if we were completely being honest about the way the system should work, I think there is some merit to conference champions, like the top 6 conference champions all making the playoff. I can, I guess, get behind that. Now, my point has always been, if you're the 6th highest ranked conference champion and you're worth being in the playoff, you can make the top 12. All those UCF teams, the worst they were ever ranked, I think, was 8th. Like, it's not that hard to make the top 10 if you're really an elite team that's worthy of making the playoff. But whatever, we can put the 6th best team. Well, the first issue is your 6th best conference isn't very good anymore, right? The Power 5 now has the Pac-9 and the Big 12, and the Big 12 cannibalized the AAC to be what they are. The AAC doesn't have Cincinnati, Houston, or UCF anymore, and everybody just glosses over that fact. And the reason the AAC's pushed a lot of stuff, and a lot of people are like, oh man, AAC commissioner, get at it. there's a reason he's pounding a lot of drums, which is they're about 2 or 3 years away from people realizing from a quality standpoint they're going to be borderline irrelevant. Just being blunt, Conference USA may actually be better than the AAC for the foreseeable future, but a lot of people really haven't looked at the way that conferences look after realignment. And so, I would posit at the very least you've got really 4 conferences that matter, including the Big 12. I'll throw them in that list. The Pac-9 is a P4.5 kind of thing. And then maybe you do conference championships for the other conferences for them to determine who their automatic bid is. But if you're one of the, I would say, especially the 4 largest ones, SEC, Big 10, ACC, and the Big 12, I think you don't do a conference championship and, you just get in, and then maybe you reserve the fact that the highest ranked team in those 4 conferences all have to get in. And then the champions, the top ranked champion from the other conferences around the country, the 1 or 2 highest ranked champions from that group collectively, whether or not you want to include the Pac-12, that those get in. Maybe that's the way to do it. Those are the only ones that have a conference championship game because those are the only ones that really need that AQ slot for what I still view to be pointless inclusionism, but it is what it is.
And why can't we just do this? Why can't we just say, like you said, let's just put the top 12 teams in and in a given year, like last year, the AAC, Tulane they caught lightning in a bottle once, and they were good enough. In my opinion, they should have been in the playoffs if there was a 12-team playoff last year. But don't make me pretend that the next year, if you take the Tulane off the board and look at the next best team outside the ones that have been removed from the AAC to go to the Big 12, it's Navy who went 4-8. That's the next best team. We don't have to pretend that because they can scramble together an 8-4 season because now they've backfilled with even worse teams that they belong in the playoffs. Let's not pretend that. Don't ask me to pretend, and don't ask me to have a worse product at the end of the year and ruin the regular season. Also, you can let this team in and give them access. And Josh, everybody keeps saying that this makes the regular season mean more because these conference championship games are going to matter because that's going to play teams into the playoffs. But I would argue that if you can win your championship like Washington did a couple of years ago, it was Utah or Washington. They lost to 3 unranked teams. 2 of them were G5s. They still won their conference. That means none of those games meant anything. All those 3 losses against bad teams meant nothing, and they still made it in anyway under these new rules. I would say it makes the regular season obviously mean less. But Josh, this really causes a problem, and we can maybe wrap on this. This causes a problem for Oregon and Washington, who are quality teams of late that are still stuck out there in the Pac-9.
Yeah, it does. And the thing that bugs me when people talk about automatic qualifiers or inclusion in the playoffs or whatnot, it's a zero-sum game. Everybody in every football game is either going to win or lose, and every game has 1 winner and 1 loser. And every 12-team playoff has 12 teams that get in and 118 that don't. And every time you take someone and by the way, when we're talking top 6, like I was trying to think through 2021, who the 6th highest ranked champion is now that Cincinnati is going to be part of the P5. And it gets really screwy. So if you go to 2021, Cincinnati was now going to be a P5 team. So you go all the way down the list. And I think it's going down, still going down. What are we at, Louisiana Lafayette? Yeah, I think it's Louisiana Lafayette. I think they were number 23. And because they get in, you got to bump somebody out. I'm trying to remember that Pitt won the AACC. I want to say that's right? So they had to be in. So you move up to the next one. So you got Utah, Michigan State, Oklahoma State. Somebody from that group has to be bumped. And when you get the team that's the 9th or 10th best team and they get bumped because there's 2 champions behind them, and just the way everything has to shake out, I think people are going to have a very different opinion.
UTSA was 12-2. They were 12-2 in 2021. They probably would have been the They beat Illinois 37-30. So they won their Power 5 game. They were 12-2. Got blown out by San Diego State in their bowl game, but they would have been in the playoffs.
So if you're Oregon and Washington and you're sitting out there and you're a pretty good team, the problem is you're trying to constantly vie for either being a conference champion in the Pac-12, which maybe gives you an automatic slot. But let's say you're both pretty good teams. One of you is going to get that slot, and the other team, now you're in this weird log jam for all these intermediate slots. And again, we get 6 teams that automatically qualify. There's only 6 at-large slots. How many Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Ohio State, Penn State teams are there vying for those slots? How many teams are you going to get knocked out just because you're in a conference that doesn't get much credit? I don't know. Maybe you're better off being in an easy conference. It depends a lot on how they're going to be viewed in the Pac-9 or the Pac-12 or what have you. And so I do think now the danger is real, because if you're in a major conference, I mean, if you look at, let's look at just last year, right? What was the top 12? And I tell you for a fact, you're going to see a lot of those Big Ten and SEC teams, right? Georgia and Michigan won their conferences, but who else is in there? Ohio State's number 4, Alabama's number 5, Tennessee's number 6, Penn State's number 11, right? Like it's literally half Big Ten and SEC teams because of how much credit they're given. And for you to squeeze in, like USC loses they were 11-1 going in the conference championship game, lose that game in their 10th. Barely would have made the playoffs last year. Kansas State wins the Big 12 and they're only 9th. And if you're a Big 12 team not named Kansas State or TCU, you ain't getting in, right? So that's the difficulty of, for example, Washington at 10-2 ends up being 12th, and they're going to get less credit going forward. So they're either going to be in a situation where they think they're going to win the conference, or they're going to attach themselves to somebody that gives them more credit. And yeah, I do think that's probably an end of the discussion for now. And I'm curious, we always talk about this on Twitter. I'm curious people's comments on it. I think there are a lot of unintended consequences from this, and I think the fallout for it is a lot more complicated than anybody wants to give it credit for. But it is something that's happening. We are going to see that fallout, and it'll be interesting to see what exactly does happen.
But in the short term, this is one thing that we can spend a few minutes on because I think it's an interesting discussion. Let's say hypothetically the Pac-12 falters, or they lose that seat at the table of an auto bid. The AAC, like you've said, we keep talking about the Big 12 not being the Big 12 because they're backfilling with G5 teams. But like you've said, also these G5 conferences aren't as good as they were because they've lost who they've lost. Let's say we get this auto bid, auto top 4 seed buy thing, whatever, cleared up, and we just get the top 12 teams. To me, now, at least in the short term, you have something that does regenerate interest, and it does make a fan of a team that's maybe 11th or 12th that's in the playoffs, has a seat at the table, outside looking in. That, to me, is interesting. What I think sort of kills this interest or doesn't fully capitalize on this interest is if you've got a UTSA in there because they won their conference, or you've got a San Diego State who ends up going back to the Pac-12 and they won their conference because everybody's left, and you're asking people to pretend that those teams belong among the others. I think there's a real opportunity here for them to get this right. In long term, we have our concerns, but in the first 4, 5, 6 years of this, I think there's real opportunity to have this be something that does amplify interest as long as we do it right and we don't have a charity thing going on.
I agree. The biggest reality that I think caused everyone to unify for the fact that something had to happen was player opt-outs. Even our end. We hear a lot of reasons why expansion was good. I think the most logical but least practical reason was this idea that you get access to the playoff and it's going to help your recruiting and your program's going to grow. There's no evidence of that ever happening in the history of college football. And again, the examples you can give from the playoff era, Michigan State, Washington, didn't see any tangible benefit whatsoever from it. But the thing that is true that everyone really should point to is just the reality that players are opting out like crazy. We created that situation with a 14 playoff. Players don't have any interest in playing in other games anymore. I have always said I would, in an ideal world, I'd rather see the bowl games because then you get like 8 versus 9. UCF versus Auburn. Why was that game fun? Well, because there were 2 relatively evenly matched teams, right? The big example, Boise State, when they beat Oklahoma, everyone forgets Boise State was the higher ranked team. Go look it up in the AP poll and the coaches poll. Oklahoma was not the higher ranked team across the board. It was actually Boise, at least in some polls, that was the higher ranked team in that game. That created those interesting matchups and storylines. I think we lose that a little bit. But those games today are played between Boise and Oklahoma's second string. They're played between UCF and Auburn's second and third string. That's not fun. No one learns anything. Even if UCF or Boise wins the game, they didn't really play the real version. And they always say, oh, it's just an excuse. I've always said the winner of the game is the winner of the game. But from a quality standpoint, to chirp about how good you were and how much you belonged, it is true that you really didn't play the real version of that football team. The biggest example I can remember was 2020 when Oklahoma played Florida. I think Florida practiced for a few days, supposedly. Florida's defense in that game, if you go look at the starters, they were all second and third string players, really, all along the front seven. I think they had 2 third string linebackers, like 2 true freshmen playing. Literally the entire wide receiving core and tight end core that included Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts did not play in that game. A lot of the linemen didn't play in the game. So you had the starting quarterback and a bunch of guys that had never played. And Oklahoma went to town on them. But it surely doesn't feel as fulfilling because they didn't play the real version of Florida. And I don't know what would ever happen if they did. The playoff gets rid of that problem. And if we let the top 12 teams in and let them play, I think any game outside those top 12 teams is going to be kind of meaningless and pointless. You're going to see opt-outs like crazy in the remaining bowls, and they're going to be all but dead. But at least I get, 12 teams playing real football in the postseason, and I get real comparisons between the conferences and teams that care. That's better than what little we get today. And again, like you said, if we end up in a situation where we start giving a lot of charity, that's going to be bad because now instead of 12 teams, I get 10. Because UTSA, as the low seed, it ain't going to come in and beat Georgia. Okay? So, if we are able to commit to the fact that we're really trying to get the 12 best teams in the playoff, in the reality of the world we live in now with opt-outs and everything else, at least for purposes of postseason play, it's going to be better than what we have today. We have a bad middle ground. People are opting out. It is what it is. So I think that is the one positive, is that the system could be pretty entertaining at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think in the short term, there's a lot of opportunity to really get re-energized and I think that this is maybe an entrance from the West Coast to keep that sort of region of football sort of alive. All right, Josh, let's switch gears and talk about some football teams in this upcoming season. I want to start with Texas. We've got some people who've asked us for a Texas preview. I don't know that we'll get like full-on preview mode for these because we're doing a few of them, but I think there's plenty to talk about with Texas. And I want to start, it might sound negative, but it's really not negative. It's more of a question. Kind of get your thoughts on it. Maybe get the commenters' thoughts on what's going on here to marry the optimism, which I also have for Texas this year, versus kind of where they were last year. And with Quinn Ewers, we were, there's a lot of fanfare, crazy good arm, came out, looked pretty good against Alabama, looked really good actually. But if you look at his season as a whole, and maybe it's because he was playing a little bit hurt, but the offense for Texas, in spite of having who I think is the best play caller, play designer in college football, they're like 24th in scoring. They lost their last game 27-20. I think TCU beat them 17-10. They didn't break 20 against Alabama. Yours was 7.4 yards per attempt guy, 58% completion rate, 15-6 touchdown interception ratio. Looking at that, where do you kind of see the optimism for this year versus the results on the field last year? Because I feel it, and I don't know if you feel it too, but where does it come from?
It's interesting because I can never quite put my finger on how I feel about Texas this season, honestly. And one of the tough things about some of these teams is trying to really gauge where they're at. And for us, for previews, I don't have the ability to see them play anyone but themselves in the spring game, so it's hard to judge. We talk about a lot that we we find previews particularly hard because we like to base our analysis based on what we actually can see and observe, either through watching the game or through real stats. And again, us with stats, we're always trying to use stats to back up our eyeballs, right? I don't want to say a guy is a great quarterback if he's a 7 yard per attempt guy. And, we may talk about a guy like that at LSU in a minute, where you got to be a little couched in what you say. Texas has been in a weird middle ground, and I think the optimism comes from the fact that the roster on the whole is more complete. They've been injury prone the last few years. There was a few years ago when that defense was loaded that I still maintain that had they stayed healthy, that would have been probably a top team and one of those Herman teams. I can't remember, it was 2 or 3 years ago, right, where basically the old defense became a mash unit by about week 5, and everybody didn't appreciate that. This roster across the board is pretty balanced, right? Worthy is an all-conference level guy trying to push to all-American level. Everybody thought he was going to be the top receiver in the country, I think, in the state of Texas last year. And as often the case, we said pump the brakes a little bit and took some heat for it, but we were just trying to say, hey, look, man, it's a big deal to be all-conference, moving to all-American, and that's probably where your goal should be here. We're moving straight to like Heisman levels, a little insane or a little unrealistic. And I think expectations went a little down to reality last year because they were an 8-5 team, right? And that's, I know your point you're getting at. This was a 4-loss regular season team, 8-5 record. Didn't really have a fantastic year. Had a solid year, if that. But given how many pieces return, 9 offensive starters returning, given the fact that the defense has turnover, but I think the talent that's come in recent years has been better. And just like the Georgias and Alabamas, you start getting more benefit of the doubt from that. Developmentally, they looked a lot better last year, and you hope you see an improvement again. Bo Davis gets a lot of credit for really changing the mentality of the front at Texas, a group that got pushed around in the past, started pushing people around a little bit, started showing their size and strength. And so I think that's the positives. The negatives to me, like you're saying, is you got a quarterback, yeah, you're bringing him back, but he was a 7.4 yard per attempt guy. That offense went through Bijan Robinson last year and Roschon Johnson. And I'm not sure what they're going to look like without him. And the last thing, I'll say on this little sub point before I turn it back to you to talk for a bit, when you talk Texas football, something I often commented on last season was that whether or not they were successful in a game really depended on how much Bijan Robinson was able to be successful. So the Oklahoma game, 5.9 yards per carry, score 49 points. West Virginia game, 4.8 yards per carry, score 38 points. Alabama, he was held to 2.7 yards per carry, only 57 yards in that game. They only scored 19. TCU held to 2.4 yards per carry, 29 yards, only scored 10 points. And what I saw on film, and I took a lot of heat for this when I called it out, and I was 100% right. I don't make negative hot takes. When I make takes like this, it's usually because I really feel like I'm seeing something. Ewer's success early in the year was really predicated on the kind of looks he was getting because of how much attention was being paid by Bijan. The Oklahoma game in particular, they could not stop Bijan Robinson, and then Roschon Johnson was such a good compliment to him that you could never really back off, that it gave them a lot of one-on-ones. It gave simple reads to Ewers, and when things were easy, he was really good. I think the thing that all of us are grappling with is, yeah, they only lost a couple guys on the offensive side of the ball, but when you had a guy that rushed for 1,580 yards, splitting a lot of time with Johnson, and not playing in the bowl, that's a huge piece. Because schematically, even so much went through Bijan. So much was set up by him. Can the rest of the offense not only can they not only try to make up for what he's lost, but can they actually take a step forward despite losing him? Can they carry the water on their own? It's a big question, and I think it's one that's really hard to answer in the preseason, which is why so many of us are struggling with it.
Yeah, I think that on one hand, the offense was really confusing to me because I do think that you've got really just such a talent in Sark. I wonder, though, we were talking about this before we hit record. I heard somebody say this week about, getting a new offense, that year one is where you really you're just figuring it out. Year two is where you you iron out all your wrinkles, and maybe that's what we're going to see with Ewers this year is year two under Sark, not reacting but proactively knowing where to go with the ball, proactively knowing what he's going to do. Because of all the numbers, the completion percentage is what really concerns me, given how I know Sark is so good at scheming up plays where the quarterback just has to deliver it to an open guy, because he schemes guys open in a pretty interesting, crazy way. One reason why I think Texas fans should be excited is, one, I don't think the schedule's too tough this year. I think the Big 12's, I think Kansas State and TCU are going to take a step back. Oklahoma a step forward, but maybe not a huge step forward. They had 5 one-score losses last year. And a couple of them, like Texas Tech and Oklahoma State, I think they blew pretty big leads in those games. So there's opportunity if the defense doesn't just go crazy and lose their mind in the second half, that they're a 10-2 type of team going into bowl season. So I think that, that can go both ways, because you could lose all your one-score games that you won, which there weren't that many of. I think there's only one, Iowa State. I think there's an opportunity in year 2, year 3 with Sark, that those close things that where you wear down late get a little bit better. I also think offensively with Isaiah Naylor, who was really good at Wyoming, and I was really high on him last year before he got hurt. I think that's a weapon that was missing last year on this team, that's potentially going to make the difference in making that quarterback comfortable. We saw this at Alabama. We've seen it at times at Georgia, where high-powered offenses without multiple options, multiple dudes at wide receiver really struggle, because you got to be able to put pressure on the defense in that way. Josh, let's look quickly at the schedule, just because I think that, like I said, we talked in the Georgia preview about how Texas and Georgia both potentially play Alabama if Alabama makes it to the SEC championship game. Texas could actually lose that week 2 game in Alabama and still be sitting pretty good, to make the playoffs. Talk a little bit about how Texas has some breathing room, maybe in a way that TCU had last year, even though they lost their last game of the season.
I mean, Texas, I think, gets the benefit of having to schedule Alabama out of conference, or having scheduled them out of conference, because it just makes the schedule that much more difficult. It gives you that much more room for error. When you go through and look at the Big 12 this year, there's no one that jumps out as being really overly dominant. Like you said, TCU is kind of in a rebuild mode, and it's unclear how that's going to pan out. I know they took a lot of transfers, but the more I dug into it, the more I felt like the transfers are going to be more role guys than standouts. So I'm kind of interested to see how they turn out. Kansas State, those are teams that sort of work on a cyclical basis, where they get more senior laden and they get good for a year or two, and then they tend to fall off. That's what the reality you live in if you're not recruiting at the level that the top P5s do. Across the board, I think everything's kind of winnable. Like you said, 5 losses, all 1 score. The other flip side of that, though, is there were also a lot of close wins, right? I mean, Iowa State, you win by 3. Kansas State, you win by 7. Even the Baylor game was a big win, but it was only by 10. You've been in a middle ground, and you've got to take a step forward and be consistently better than your competition. And that's really the goal. To me, whether you can make it to the playoff is going to be whether or not you slip up against bad teams. The schedule doesn't have a lot of world beaters. If you're a real top 5 team, it's very doable to navigate the schedule, even with Alabama with 1 loss. And that puts you in prime position. And I think 2 losses has always been extremely hard to make the playoffs. That would depend a lot on what else everybody else does. But certainly with 1 loss, you're in prime position, I think, to make the playoffs. But again, it's about consistency. And to sort of wrap around to what you were saying before, whether or not you can go up and beat someone like Houston at Houston, or BYU, or Kansas State, or at TCU on a consistent basis, comes down to whether the little fundamental things that Texas has struggled with in recent years truly get ironed out, whether the mentality really has changed, where you're able to assert your physicality, because this is an offensive line that was really young in a lot of ways, especially at the tackle position last year, and they're going to have a lot more seniority this season. They're going to have the ability to push people around if they improve the way they should. The quarterback position, I'm still unsure of. My biggest concern there is Ewers, like the Iowa State game, he'd have guys running free deep and he'd just miss them. That's concerning because I don't know that you can fix that. But if you can get a hold of your reads and just get a better ability to continue to move the ball, and maybe you learn that you don't take those deep shots that often unless a guy is running free, which Sark is going to do for you, but you just take the easy open guy and let him make a play, you're going to beat the majority of people on your schedule not doing anything fancy just by doing that, just because the talent you have on your roster. That's the question. And whether or not Texas becomes that consistent football team or not, I think is going to determine whether they make the playoffs. And now, winning the playoffs is a different discussion. I don't want to go down that road. I will tell you right now, I don't know how much confidence I would have that Texas has a good shot to win the playoff. But if you're Texas, you just want to make it. You want to get to where Oklahoma was a few years ago, and then you're going to deal with the same realities Oklahoma did, which is the level of competition really does step up, not just a tier, but 2 tiers at that level, just because of the nature of football, especially in the Big Ten and the SEC. But right now, can you be consistent enough to win the games you ought to win? Because then you're in prime position to at least get to the postseason in the playoff world you want to be playing in.
Vegas has given Texas 9.5 as their win total, and they gave Oklahoma the same 9.5, which is interesting given the years that both these teams had last year. Josh, I'm going over that 9.5 pretty comfortably. I think that Texas can lose. That gives Texas the ability to lose to Alabama, which I don't even know that they will. Like, I'm just saying, like, let's look at kind of worst case scenario or whatever. They could lose to Alabama and Oklahoma, which is probably going to be the second best team on their schedule, and still bust that 9.5. What do you think about that?
Make a lot of Texas fans unhappy with me right now, but I'm actually going to take the under. I am very high on Alabama this year. I don't know that I would pick them over Georgia to win the national title, but they're definitely in my top 3. And I think as much as people can sleep on Alabama, they're sleeping on Alabama. They're lined up to be more of a classic team under Saban's tenure, and that's going to be extremely difficult for Texas to win because it's the one game where you're going to have the inferior roster. The rest of the season, the question is, do you lose 2 games or not? That's what that over-under is saying. And I think they do. I don't think the quarterback situation is consistent enough. And I don't even mean there are concerns about whether or not Ewers or whoever plays mentally consistent enough. But the thing that concerns me is I saw a lot of mechanics issues with Ewers last year. He's a little weird in his release. He gets kind of bad about his mechanics when he gets put off his spot, and his deep ball can be really sporadic, especially if he's not throwing on rhythm. That's a thing that can put you in a difficult situation in a football game. And when Texas has been in a difficult situation, they have not performed well. So if you're a Texas fan and you say, well, we've changed, the mentality's changed, if I see that and that happens, I totally think you're going to go over. But that's a change that needs to happen, and it's a change that right now I haven't seen. So where I'm sitting today, having seen Texas be where they are, looking at Sark's past as a head coach, I think he's a great play caller. I think he can do really good things for a team. We both felt like he's one of the best hires in college football. But for a team that's really got to change its culture and change its mentality, that's asking a lot. And I think without the real playmakers that they need, without, I would say, proven playmakers really outside Xavier Worthy, it's going to be hard for this football team not to find a way to drop 1 or 2 games, especially in the Big 12 where offenses are crazy and you end up in shootouts. So I think the 9.5 number is pretty reasonable. It's only there because they play Alabama and Oklahoma doesn't. Let's be really clear on that. But genuinely, I'd take the under. As much as I hate to say it, as much as I think they may be a better football team. Again, it's an 8-5 football team. They can be a better football team and easily go 9-3 or 8-5 again.
I think the wide receiver room is going to really surprise some people this year. And I called Sark winning the Big 12 in his 3rd year. And I have to defend Sark against all these Ohio State fans that are like, he's never won anything as a head coach, blah, blah, blah. I think he gets it done this year. I think he wins the Big 12 this year. It'll be interesting to see, but here's, I keep turning it back to you, Josh, but I think this is an interesting topic, and we can end on this. But for me, I have this maybe unfounded optimism for Texas this year, and I expect them to be really good. And there's the joke about Texas being back, which is different from having optimism about a team. But I think that a lot of people share the optimism that I have and don't necessarily know why. Josh, do you think if they don't hit that 9.5 over this year, a lot of that benefit of the doubt starts to go away with Texas, and people join you where you're at?
Oh, it's
like, is this the show me year?
It's a put up or shut up year, for sure. The roster is good enough to go 10-2 readily in the with this schedule in the Big 12. I'm always hesitant to say you should go 10-2, and again, playing Alabama is such a huge asterisk. Same way for like Oregon last year when they played Georgia, right? Going 11-1 gets really freaking hard when you play a top 3 team out of conference. But let's just say for conference sake, right? Going 8-1 in conference is really hard. Going 9-0 is really, really hard. And they've got to go 8-1 in conference probably. But they've got the roster to do it. They are better than everyone. Pretty much they play Oklahoma again, took 2 steps back. I think they'll right the ship somewhat, but there's still so many holes on that roster, particularly defensively. I can't see them being really on par with Texas. But this is the year where all those pieces have got to come together. They've got to be a cohesive unit. They got to play better on a consistent basis, offensively and defensively. And Sark's got to show his genius a little bit to give that offensive spark that at times when it needed it, it didn't have last year. So I do think they're going to be evaluated. And I think, to be frank, it's fair to evaluate them on how this year goes. It's going to be a bit of a referendum on the culture of that program and where the direction they're headed. So it's interesting to see, and I don't think any of us know. So if you're a Texas fan, be anxious, be excited. That's all fair. It's a big year for you, and doesn't matter what I say. Go out and win the football games and prove me wrong, right? And that's the thing that they have the opportunity to do, and it's the thing they have the opportunity to fail at.
And regardless of what happens this season, I think that Texas deserves a ton of credit because they're one of these teams that schedules a big brand name every year. And they're not always good. Like, who they schedule doesn't always end up being good because they do it so far in advance. But you can see in their scheduling, they're very earnest in trying to play big boy football and not just, bake in a free win on their resume to maybe back their way into something in the postseason. I think they deserve all the credit in the world for that. All right, Josh.
Yep, agreed.
You and I have done a lot of pre-talk about the LSU Bengal Tigers. And I have a feeling that this is going to be a bit of a, shall we say, rocky discussion in some parts about LSU this year. But I want to start in a spot that obviously is positive for LSU, and that's Brian Kelly. This is a guy that both you and I have a ton of respect for. Did you expect him to have as much success as he did at LSU in year one? Like, we both love the guy, but to me, I thought he did a lot better, than I was even thinking.
Yes and no. In the abstract, I kind of did expect him to make that program serviceable fast. We did a preview when Brian Kelly was hired, and we were both very clear that we felt like he was the ultimate fit to LSU. LSU is best when they have a boring adult in the room, quite frankly. Nick Saban, Brian Kelly, what are they? They are boring, traditional coaches. They want to be coaches. They don't want to be exciting, rah-rah guys. And they're going to do everything the old-fashioned way. But the biggest thing is they're a calming presence. More than anything, though, they're a structured and organized presence. Ed Orgeron is a great interim coach. I've said this 1,000 times because he can come in and he can motivate young men. He can really find a way to find an edge in the program, get you back playing on the same page in a team, usually that's playing really poorly and loses their head coach. He can turn you around and make you good again that year. But the 9 months outside of the regular season, he is a disaster. That has been his track record from Ole Miss and everywhere else he's ever gone. He doesn't know how to run a nutrition program or a tutoring program. He doesn't know how to figure out what players he's got in his roster, self-evaluate, figure out what scheme they need to run, make sure that he's got guys doing proper evaluations of opposing teams and game plans, make sure those game plans are then cut up into pieces, and then you schedule every practice. The amount of organizational effort that guys like Kelly and Saban put into running the program is way beyond what anyone appreciates. That's what caused Orgeron to very predictably fail, and that's what caused Brian Kelly to pretty predictably succeed. And so I did think he was going to have a lot of success, but frankly, when I looked at that roster at LSU with what Orgeron left, I didn't think he had the pieces to do what he did last year. And you got to give him a lot of credit because he used the transfer portal to shore up what were major deficiencies. If you look at the bowl game before Kelly came in, that secondary depth was scary bad. And there were a lot of places on this roster, as much as they had 5 stars and studs, they had guys that shouldn't have been playing SEC football that were going to have to start for LSU. Kelly came in, and to his credit, quickly realized what was going on, quickly saw where his holes were, brought guys in, filled those positions, and put together a squad. Everybody wanted him to fight on what quarterback he was going to start. He leaned into Jaden Daniels, said, this is going to be our identity. We're going to try to focus on the run. We're going to have a quarterback and run the ball, and we're going to try to develop an offense around him. Took a lot of heat week 1, lost to Florida State. And that was a good Florida State team, better than people realized, I think, at the time. And it was a little fluky, too. But still, they improved. They turned around. They became a better team. And, again, contrast to Ed Orgeron, I still remember 2021. It went halfway through the season before they realized, hey, we've got a bunch of superstar pass rushers. We probably should be blitzing a lot. And, oh, hey, we looked at it in the off week, and we figured out we're like one of the least blitzing teams in the country. Do people realize how stupid that is? That they didn't realize that? That you're not going to have that with Brian Kelly. You're not. And they've got enough talent that they should be perennially an 8 to 10 win team minimum. And so I'm not surprised in a sense, but I am surprised, given what he inherited, that he was able to patch up the holes so quickly and put something back together like he did.
I have this theory that LSU is going to be a better team this year, maybe by a pretty decent clip, but possibly a worse record or the same record. Florida State the schedule's tough. Florida State, I think, is going to be as good or better than last year, and that game's in Orlando. It's not a road game, but it's not a home game. LSU fans are going to travel for this game. Like, a lot of people talk about how, like, oh, Georgia played so-and-so in Atlanta, so it's a home game, or LSU played Florida State in New Orleans, so it's a home game. For good teams that travel really well, it's not a home game just because it's in the state that the opponent resides in. So I don't think that game in Orlando is going to be a true road game just because it's in Florida, but I think it's going to be tough. It's not at home. They're at Alabama this year. They've got 3 out of 4 on the road. Mississippi State, home Arkansas, then at Ole Miss, at Missouri. The schedule's tough. I think A&M is going to be better this year, which A&M beat them last year for whatever reason. I don't know, because LSU was a much better team. I think A&M just played with nothing to lose and hit some stuff they didn't normally hit. But the schedule is tough this year, Josh, and they're breaking in a lot of new pieces. We saw they did well in the transfer portal the year before, but they had to go like crazy on the transfer portal this year and for defense. So I have some concerns there. Josh, is it possible that we're looking at a team that is maybe even better but loses more games?
I mean, it easily can be the case, right? I think it's easy to forget that they went 8-4 last year. I mean, the over/under for Vegas is 9.5, and we've had some discussions about teams that we felt like may or may not hit that over/under win total. And to a lot of LSU fans' chagrin, I'll go own it. I said LSU was unlikely to hit 9.5. But why is it? It's a schedule. If they're the same team with the same record they were last year, realize they don't hit 9.5. They went 8-4 last year in the regular season. And the schedule is, I think, harder. Florida State is going to be a better team than they were last year. They became a much better team over the course of the season. They had some big transfer portal additions, and the word that everyone's hearing out of Tallahassee is the players kind of bought in over the course of last year, and it's paying dividends in the offseason. I would expect that to be a much tougher game than it was last year. You never know, but that really should be the realistic expectation. Playing at Alabama is a lot harder. You still got to play Texas A&M. You still got to play Florida. You still got to play Auburn. You still got to play Arkansas, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, at Mississippi State. It's just not easy playing in the SEC West, especially when you have a top 10 team out of conference to open the year. And like you said, they took a lot of transfers last year. I was impressed with how quickly they came together. I don't know that any of us could have predicted, and I know their coaching staff couldn't have predicted whether or not it was going to work. I think everyone is making a lot of assumptions that they're going to necessarily have the same success. And I don't mean to say that it's a bad thing, but you don't know if it's going to be better or worse. The one thing I'll say is just watching some of the players that are going to have to step up. I wasn't wholly impressed with Denver Harris last year when he played some for Texas A&M. I wasn't wholly impressed with Sage Ryan in coverage in particular when he played at LSU. That was a highly touted player, Ryan, 5 stars and a lot of services, that hasn't played a lot, and I think it's because he's really struggled in coverage. There are reasons to have concerns. And they've got some other transfer guys that I know they brought in because they probably aren't sure about a lot of these players. And they want to make sure they're serviceable. But serviceable doesn't get you to 10-2 in the SEC West, playing Florida State in the opener. And offensively, I think we also have to be realistic of the fact that this was an offense that was pretty good and has a lot of pieces, but was not consistently that productive. So you need the defense to be good, because if the offense is the same offense as it was last year, you are likely to drop 3 games for the same reason, which is they're games where you're just not going to score enough points to win in the modern era of football.
I think they were down like 3 offensive linemen versus Tennessee last year. So that game was kind of over before it got started. Their 4th loss was against Georgia in the SEC championship game. So in general, like 6-2 SEC record was really good, and that Florida State game could have gone either way. The challenge for me really is I feel like they're going to have to score more points this year than they did last year, because I think the defense is going to take a little bit of a step back. And my concern in all of this is LSU to have a better year than last year, and this is very possible that it could happen. I'm just skeptical. Jaden Daniels has to make a leap from last year to this year. And it's possible that he will because he's more comfortable in the system and he's been there a year and he's a transfer last year. But he's got 4 years of tape, 4 years of a lot of production. His yard per attempt has gone down every single year since he started his first year in 2019 at Arizona State. He was 7.5 yards per attempt last year, although he had a great 17-3 touchdown interception ratio, and he ran the ball really well. 885 yards, 4.8 yards per carry, which that factors in sacks. That's a really good weapon on the ground. But Josh, he's got to make another step. He's got to go from 7.5 yards attempt to in the 9s, even as a good runner, if Texas A&M or if LSU wants to beat Texas A&M, beat Alabama, and go 10-2 this year.
Yeah, and this is where I'll be a little more negative. And let me be clear. I've been wrong on LSU picking them for or against, I feel like, every game for the last 2 years. I cannot get LSU right to save my life. If you want to disagree with me, I don't blame you at all. If you're down in the comments, just understand that, right? That this is a hard team to judge. Now, I will say, pump a little credit, 2019 preseason, I said I thought it was the best roster on paper by far since 2011. And nobody ever gives me credit for that part. But I thought they were going to be extremely good national title level in 2019 with that roster. I don't necessarily see it with this one. And I'm going to note one thing. You talked about Jaden Daniels. But one of my concerns is something that's being listed as a strength by a lot of people. And I think that's a simplistic view. It's the receiving core. If you look at it, yes, they bring back Neighbors, who was really the guy that made that team click. But losing Butte and losing Jenkins is a bigger deal than people want to make it out to be. Keyshawn Butte did not play well for large stretches of the season. But late in the year, he came on and he was important. He had 7 receptions in the game against Alabama. He had 6 receptions for 107 yards in the game against Georgia. Those games where the offense started to show up late in the year and gave a lot of confidence. it really did correspond really heavily with Boutte finally remembering who he was as a football player, and he did end up being the number 2 receiver on the team, both in terms of receptions and yards in 2022. And the other guy, Jaray Jenkins, accounted for 6 of the 23 touchdowns. So between those two guys, 9 out of 23 touchdowns was a huge chunk of the receiving yardage. Again, Neighbors is a good receiver. He's going to continue to be a good receiver. I think Brian Thomas is one of the better young receivers in the conference, but those two guys. And last year, with Neighbors, Boutte, Jenkins, and Thomas, you really had 4 receivers, along with Mason Taylor, the tight end, that you could put out at any given time and have high-level receiver play. There are a lot of assumptions, I think, a lot of it based on recent production, that they're going to be able to roll out a receiving core like that again. I believe things when I see it, right or wrong. And right now, I don't know that I see it. I'm not sure that you can just take for granted that Neighbors and Thomas are going to be able to buttress whoever the number 3, number 4, number 5 guys are and have the same kind of production you got last season with the depth of receiving talent. Because we talk about this a lot. College football is a game where most teams just don't have 5 or 6 high-level defensive backs. And if you can put a whole bunch on the field like Tennessee did last year, you can really eat people apart. And for the same reason that I think Tennessee is a little skittish, LSU is too. Tennessee's not going to have 4 NFL caliber receivers. I don't know if LSU is going to have 4 NFL caliber receivers. And it's jarring to me, like I'm looking at one of the preview magazines, Aaron Anderson is listed as one of the starting wide receivers, who's a transfer from Alabama. Aaron Anderson didn't break the depth chart for Alabama last year, and Alabama's receivers weren't particularly good. So that's my big thing, is I think Jana Daniels can improve, but I don't see the receivers improving. And it's just one more question mark to throw in there for an assumption of why an 8-4 regular season team is going to be a top 5 team, because I think in a lot of LSU fans' minds, they see themselves as a top 5 team. If we're talking top 15, I'm on board. This is a top 15 team, no question. They're a good football team. Anybody that wants to say they're scrubs is completely wrong. But if you want to talk top 5, if you want to talk about 10-2 in the SEC West, playing Florida State in the opener, that's a high level of football, and I see too many question marks to necessarily buy into that.
I'll give you a little pushback. I love, because we always agree. We agree on everything, that it's great when I get to be like, oh, man, you're wrong. I'll give you a little pushback on Boutte for 2 reasons. One, in the regular season, he had a 100-yard game. His second best game was 51 yards against Alabama. You mentioned he caught 7 passes, 7.3 yards per attempt. That's a really good rushing average, but it's not a great receiving average. He had 538 yards total in the season, 11 yards per catch. That's really pretty bad. And he was a bit of a locker room cancer, a little bit of an attitude on the field kind of guy. So I don't think they're going to have a hard time replacing a 6th-round guy who had 11 yards a catch. I think they might have a hard time replacing who he should have been. I don't think they have a receiver, maybe other than Neighbors, on the squad who is as good as Boutte should have been. But last year he was such a disappointment for me that I think that kind of a breath of fresh air reset might be in the cards for them. Okay, Josh. So what did you say earlier? You already had the Vegas total. I haven't looked it up.
Yeah, it's 9.5.
Okay,
is the Vegas line.
Ooh, that's tough. That Vegas knows what they're doing, because that is right there. Now they're kind of the sexy pick for the West. Winning the West this year. I think the tough thing with 9.5 is that Florida State game, right? Because if they lose to Florida State, which I'm not sure they will. I don't even know if Florida State's favored in that game. But they lose to Florida State, they've got so little margin for error the rest of the way. And I think a lot of these teams, like Auburn's going to be much better this year, in my opinion. A&M's going to be better this year, in my opinion. Florida's going to be better, even without a top 10 draft pick at quarterback. I think they're going to be a lot better team. And they scored 35 on LSU last year. So this is the first one that I've picked this year, but I'm going under. I'm really high on Florida State. Having to play at Alabama's tough. At Ole Miss, I'm going to go under right at 9.
Yeah, it is hard. Yeah, I'd take the under as well. So the LSU Florida State game, we're just looking at early lines, and it's opened at 2.5. LSU's favored. That's it. It's less than a field goal, which I think is realistic. Not a ding on LSU, but how good Florida State is, and that really tempers our expectations. And look, when you talk over and under, if LSU beats Florida State and you were to go bet on the over and under, I guarantee you that line is going to be over 10. Like the moment they beat Florida State, the line is going to move to 10-2 or 11-1 is what you're going to be betting on, not 8 or 9 wins. But when it's one of those things where you just add Florida State to the list of games they can lose. I have to take the under. I think it's more likely this is an 8 or 9 win team than it is a 10 or an 11 for sure. And it really just comes down to the fact that the schedule is brutal. And like you said, they could be a better football team and easily lose more games. And last year, they beat Alabama fair and square, and Alabama fans could complain about that all they want. LSU was the better football team that night. But that also wasn't a particularly good Alabama team, which you have to admit is the other side of that coin. I think Alabama's going to be a lot better this year. And that's the case, again, with a lot of other teams, like you mentioned, like Auburn, and you go on down the list, Florida State. LSU can improve and lose game to teams that they didn't lose to last year very easily. And so it's just hard for me to see this being a 10-2 team just because of the difficulty of the schedule and the fact that I think the SEC West is probably going to be on much more of an upswing next year.
This year. The thing that should really excite you if you are an LSU fan is if you do win that Florida State game, it informs on a lot of question marks. Because the question is, can you replace players on defense with transfers? Can you take a step forward or not, or at least tread water on a good team last year against a Florida State team who I legitimately think is a really good team this year, a 10-win team? That answers a lot of questions quick. That at least tells you you're in the competitive sphere with other 10-win Power 5 teams. So I think that all eyes are on that game. It's kind of encouraging for LSU fans that Vegas has them as a slight favorite in the state of Florida. So I like that one a lot. All right, Josh. Anything else on LSU?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is a team that we're going to learn a lot, like you said, in the Florida State game. And I know we'll do a preview of that one. I don't know who I'll pick right now. I really want to break down Florida State a little more detail. But if you're an LSU fan coming out of it and you win that game and you want to see, told you so. I mean, we'll be like, we're happy for you, but we're not surprised that LSU would win. I just don't know what to think. And like you said, the best thing as an LSU fan is I think you're going to really have a good idea coming out of game one what you may think. And again, LSU is just going to get better over the course of the year. You're going to see that under Brian Kelly. That's the benefit of Brian Kelly. But you're going to have an idea of where your expectations need to be. And even for us, we don't really know where to pin LSU. And our tune is going to change one way or the other, I guarantee you, based off the results of that first game.
That's the benefit of us, it being our show. We can change our tune whenever we want. All right, Josh, let's switch gears to Michigan. The Michigan Wolverines coming off that really good season last year. And I'm going to open this with a rant, if you will grant me that. I don't like this argument that, first of all, I'm going to bring it somewhat back to Alabama because a lot of Alabama fans are like, yeah, Alabama should have been in the playoffs over TCU. Look what happened in that game. Don't you think Alabama would have been more competitive? A lot of those same people are dismissing Michigan in their season because this transitive property thing of like, well, if Georgia can blow out TCU, then what does that say about Michigan? It's embarrassing, whatever. That is the dumbest argument that anyone could make. First of all, it's a week later. That's my big thing. Like maybe not even any second of all. The team you get after a month to prepare is so much different than team you get week to week. And we saw this with TCU, who throughout the season they were barely beating teams who were playing on their second or third string quarterback by like one score. That doesn't mean TCU was a bad team. It just means that, one, they're a very senior-laden team, and two, when you give any team a month to prepare, that's a tough situation. That is a really tough situation. Like, the Cincinnati-Alabama game in 21 was ugly. We've seen Notre Dame and Clemson. I think they had an ugly playoff game. Because when you give a team time to prepare, you get their best shot, and you get a lot of script. And so a lot of people are putting that game on Michigan. I think that's ridiculous. They played a really good team, and I don't think Georgia beats TCU 65-7 or whatever if they play them in the first round of the playoffs. So let's kind of push that out to the side. Josh, I'm going to have you explain to Michigan fans why we keep missing predictions for Michigan, wins and losses. But namely, we keep missing this Ohio State Michigan thing. We've missed it, I think, 3 years in a row now. One picking Michigan, two of them on Ohio State. What's going on there with our missing the mark on who Michigan is as a team, both good and bad?
Yeah, it's 3 or 4 years in a row I've been wrong. I just keep, it's at some point it becomes worth it to just bet opposite of what I say in that game, and it's not a negative Michigan thing because I picked Michigan for a couple of years, and then switched and then was wrong anyway. I think there are a number of factors that have been converging. People talk about rivalry games being more unpredictable. First, let me say that's just wrong, scientifically wrong. There have been a couple of studies where people have dug into the stats of it. One, rivalry games tend to be more unpredictable in a sense just because those games tend to be closer. From an against the spread standpoint, they're no more unpredictable than any other game with low spread totals. And in fact, rivalry games actually have a lower rate of major upsets than do non-rivalry games. And I think the reason for that's pretty simple. Teams tend to give each other their best shot in the rivalry game. But when you're closely matched teams, 2.5 point spread or a 3 point spread is not much. Even a touchdown spread is really like a 60% chance to win. It's not a huge deal. I probably just gave that stat wrong, but we'll roll with it. I think the reality for these two teams is that they've been fairly closely matched the past several years, and things have kind of come one way or the other. I think the team that hasn't gotten the most hype has had a little more chip on their shoulder. I also think a lot of other things have come into play where, the weather is necessarily maybe has favored the team that runs the ball more, or it's favored the team that throws it more. Ohio State has been the more wide open offense, Michigan being the more run based. I think a lot of it has been matchups. Michigan has had a lot of advantages on the front seven, right? Hutchinson was a heck of a player. Last year on the defensive line, you had Mike Morris and Sandra still that were really dynamic players getting to the quarterback, along with Oki, and Harrell, who actually does return. And I think that's given Ohio State a lot of fits because when you got pressure on C.J. Stroud, he struggled. Their offense just totally went in the tank for a half often against Michigan the last couple of years. And that's led them to lose games that they were otherwise looking like they could be competitive in. So, I think it's a combination of factors, but I think a lot of it had to do with styles of play, had to do with circumstance, had to do with particular matchups. The fact that Michigan has gotten better defensively. When they moved on from Don Brown, we were very critical of Don Brown, and we love the guy. We think if you got a team and you need to have a good defensive coordinator, go get Don Brown. If you got a team that wants to go win the national championship, do not touch Don Brown because his schemes against high-level dynamic offenses in college just got exposed. He really put way too much on safeties and corners, and against high-level RPO teams, I mean, they would just run simple crossing routes and things, dump the ball off, and the guy would go for 60 yards over and over. They fixed that problem at Michigan, and they fixed it at a time when they had a great pass rush, and they fixed it at a time when they were running the ball on the ground really well, when Ohio State has struggled in the front seven to stop the run the way they had in prior years. We kind of missed the coagulation of all those factors, but I don't think it should be surprising that Michigan's beaten Ohio State. I think we were just stupid for not seeing why the shift happened the way it did. But all that said, it's a new team, new year. Both teams are trying to make changes. Ohio State's made changes on the defensive side of the ball themselves with a new coordinator. And, it's a different roster for Michigan. So, let's get into talking about it.
And I've beaten Michigan up enough about their out-of-conference scheduling. I'm not going to do it again. I will say for our kind of SEC listeners that love to also join in and beat them up over it, they get back on track next year. Incidentally, in a year where Ohio State doesn't play a Power 5 team out of conference, Michigan does. The thing that I'm curious about with Michigan this year, Josh, is the way the schedule is laid out. it's hard to really know kind of who they are until maybe that October 7th road trip to Minnesota. In your opinion, like, is that a good thing or a bad thing for Michigan, in that we talked about Georgia not having that margin for error because their schedule is weak? Michigan's schedule isn't weak, it's just backloaded. They finished the season Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State. And Maryland and Penn State are both on the road. And Maryland, I think they're better. I think they're a better team. We've always beaten up on them a little bit because they struggled so much along with Rutgers when they first joined the Big Ten. But that's a quality 8-4 every year type team now. So if you're Michigan, like what do you do with a schedule that's seemingly so backloaded? Like, how do you evaluate them?
Well, there's two sides, right? How do you coach them and how do you evaluate them? It's the Clemson problem. And the Clemson problem was that we'd always talk about Clemson early in the year were playing teams that were so beneath their level that we couldn't really evaluate how they were going to play in postseason. And the thing we've always cautioned in those situations is just because you play worse competition doesn't mean you're a worse team, particularly if you're dominant. But the other thing in terms of coaching them is we often talked about those Clemson teams really didn't play very well a lot of times against inferior competition. Go back and look at the 2015 and 2016 seasons from Clemson. We were, I think, I guess we've been doing this a long time. I guess we were starting the show around that time period. And we were really skeptical until late in the year. Even 2018 was even another example. Well, there's a reason for it. They didn't play great for a lot of those years. But the problem is when you play down lower level competition, it's easy to play down to the competition. But for the coaches, it does give you the opportunity to work on a lot of stuff. You can do what it is you want to do and stick to it, and generally you're going to win the ball game, but you're going to get better every time you do it. And I think what we're going to see from Michigan is that they're going to lean again on the run game. They're going to getting back Corum and Donovan Edwards gives them a tremendous leg up on most everyone else in the country. And the one thing that they do have to do is figure out the offensive line. So they may start as many as 3 transfers in the offensive line. I won't beat them up here, but I'll note when you talk about development and as a program, it's a little sketch to me when you talk about having potentially 3 transfers in the offensive line. It's the reality of what we're dealing with, but that's not a Michigan developmental thing that says you didn't have guys that should start. And it also means to the extent that Michigan does develop players well, does that really matter when you're dealing with a multitude of transfers? But anyway, we don't even know who's going to start at this point, and I'm sure people are going to argue with me about it being somebody else starting as we progress to the season, and every scrimmage of camp, the roster probably changes. But those guys need to mesh. And so they're going to work on those lesser teams on trying to get them to mesh. They're probably going to do things they're not great at. They're probably not going to do their pin and pull schemes as cleanly as they had a year or two ago. And people are going to be, including us, are going to be kind of negative on him. But Harbaugh's going to stick with it. This is what makes Harbaugh good. And stubbornly keep doing those things until they get better and better. And at the end of the year, they're going to be cohesive. They're going to be good. And if you look at like the Gus Malzahn teams that went to BCS games, the marquee of those teams is they kept running that scheme week to week, and they were often almost losing to a Mississippi State early in the year or losing to an LSU or Mississippi State early. And then by the end of the year, running those plays over and over again, they were a machine. And that machine is what you want to be as a Michigan fan. And you don't really care if you beat, Nebraska by 10 or by 40. It doesn't matter at all. All that matters is that you get to the point where at the end of the season, you can win at Penn State, you can beat Ohio State, and you're going to have the reps to do it. A lot of teams, when you have difficult games early in the year, you got to adjust what you're doing because you can't afford to lose. So you have to play outside your scheme. You got to do what you do well, even if it's not what you know you can do the best. Michigan isn't in that position. It is a benefit, but yeah, it's a lot of new pieces and it's a lot to grow to. And I will say for postseason, maybe teeing up a later discussion, you also got to worry a little bit how much that run first, power football scheme is really viable in postseason play when teams have an opportunity to really prepare for it. Because again, when you play Ohio State and they get 1 week to prepare, they're not used to playing those schemes and then get beat up. You go play somebody in the playoff, they do, and they're well prepared for it. So there's a lot of factors at play here if you're a Michigan fan.
Yeah, one thing that's encouraging to me, if I'm a Michigan fan, is, for years, and I remember saying this when we previewed Michigan, Georgia in 21, and we weren't really high on Michigan because the matchups weren't great. I think that one of the things that Michigan fans said to us then was, just wait, our offense can do the things that they haven't shown because they've just kind of been holding back. And if we need to go vertical, if we need to get dynamic, we can. And they didn't. They kind of stuck really with that more, power approach. I think that approach in 22 was different in that they did show that when J.J. McCarthy needed to turn it on, he could. 11 yards an attempt versus Ohio State. 10 yards an attempt versus TCU. TCU, because we just got finished talking about, I think there's an interesting dichotomy here because we just got finished talking about Texas and how there's all this positive momentum about Texas, and we're like, okay, but you've got a quarterback that threw for 7.4 yards per an attempt last year, lost to TCU in a game where their offense only scored 10 points, right? On the flip side, there's still this feeling of not believing in Michigan's offense and not believing in J.J. McCarthy, even though the dude had one of the better seasons statistically last year of all the quarterbacks. Solid 8.5 yards an attempt. In big games, he really showed up. So I think there's an interesting point here that a lot of people are overlooking is like, he was a dude last year. And what you saw is throughout the year, he'd have these games where it's like 161 total yards passing, 180 total yards passing. And you think, okay, they're doing this power, 3 yards, cloud of dust kind of thing. But it was really that they were scoring 45 points, and he only had to throw for 160 yards, and he only had 11 attempts. That kind of thing sort of flew under the radar. And yes, they lost to TCU, but it wasn't because his arm wasn't working. TCU just put up a ton of points. So I know there's defensive scores and all that, but still, that's kind of a quiet, unsung thing about this year that people are forgetting. And I think, Josh, a lot of people are also forgetting the thing that we love to take a victory lap on, and that's that Josh Gaddis really held this offense back, and now they finally got somebody running the show offensively that knows what they're doing.
Yeah. First, I just make clear, right? For all statistical purposes, everything you can see on paper, and even if you go back and watch the games, I'm just going to say it. J.J. McCarthy is a better quarterback than Quinn Ewers. Okay? I'm just putting it out there. And there's a lot of optimism, I think, still because of Quinn Ewers' recruiting ranking, and McCarthy doesn't get any credit. Well, one, with Ewers, I've always pointed out that guy when he went to Ohio State and then transferred back to Texas, he's a guy that during COVID reclassified from a junior to a senior. So he had never played senior year of football. His junior year of football was concatenated. They didn't have camp, so even his junior year he didn't really camp because of COVID. And then he got ranked the number one overall player, perfect rating player. Still insane to me because the guy didn't have a lot of tape. He really didn't have a lot of tape. He never camped, didn't have the chance to camp. Only played 3 years of high school football. One of the years was doing COVID. But we're optimistic on him because of recruiting ratings. We're optimistic of him because he's with Sark. And we give no credit to McCarthy. We've actually seen on the field. He's actually played well on the field. He's shown consistent improvement. And it's just, I think it's just generally unfair. And you have to remind me again, what's the full question?
Just I didn't. There wasn't a question. I just commented that people forget that now Josh Gaddis isn't there anymore.
Yeah, well, and that was the other thing I wanted to say too. I'll let you take a victory lap on this. You've been on the Josh Gaddis hate train for as long as I can remember because he was a receiver coach at Alabama who loved to take credit for that offense in 2018. That everything we heard was that no, that was Mike Locksley, the coordinator's offense, which we've seen him at Maryland. He's a good coordinator. Gaddis had never called plays. Michigan made a huge mistake hiring him, I think. And, he just went to Miami and looked like he may have ruined Tyler Van Dorn in what was an absolute abject disaster. So I don't think there's any doubt that Gaddis was a huge reason why those Michigan teams that I picked to beat Ohio State in that era didn't. And I don't know, maybe you want to take a victory lap with that because I do think the changes they made in the coaching staff, offensively and defensively, are starting to pay major dividends.
Yeah, and my big complaint with Josh Gaddis or the hiring of Josh Gaddis is that it felt like Harbaugh wanted to keep his hand in the cookie jar because at Michigan you don't have to hire a guy that's never called plays before. Like you're a brand big enough to hire somebody who called plays before. Now they did, they won in 21 with him, but probably in spite of him. And I think his inability to really coach and know what to call in terms of play calls to adjust against Georgia showed up a lot. And that's why we always talk about, I talked about it with Alabama this year in that I keep going back to Alabama and Michigan preview, and I'm sorry, y'all. It's just because they're Alabama and Georgia, they're the brand or whatever. Michigan's up there now. Alabama had a coach an offensive coordinator who had them have 16 instances of consecutive 3-and-outs. The previous 2 years before he was there, they had one. And you see some of this with Michigan in that there's addition by subtraction, and people don't realize how good Michigan could have been in 21, even though they were very good, and how good they actually were in 22 because of that, especially on the offense. You didn't see the same sluggishness where they would disappear for a couple of quarters. You didn't see that at the same scale because they had a play calling situation that was a lot more organic and knew how to react in certain situations. So from that standpoint, I think it's even better in 23. And I think that's very encouraging. I picked Michigan in our first show. I think I picked Michigan to make the playoffs this year, and I think it's a little bit more the same. Now, I do think they have an easy schedule up until they get that Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State situation, but they've got a lot of room there to also still win the Big Ten East, and I don't see that they'll be particularly challenged if that happens in the conference championship game. The thing for Michigan, though, and we need to kind of address this sort of elephant in the room. The thing for Michigan is that postseason. And this is, to me, we talked about this being the regular season Texas put up or shut up. Got to win 10 games, have some momentum. Michigan's won enough hardware in the Big Ten and enough games in the Big Ten, Josh, that this is a put up or shut up postseason situation because Harbaugh's postseason record at Michigan is not great. Like, they don't have a good track record. It's time for them to make that next move. And I know it's a big ask, but they've got to win. They've got to make the playoffs and win a game there. Right, Josh?
They do. And I think the biggest thing for Michigan is either you're going to turn the corner and you're going to establish that you're a Georgia where you can come in the postseason and blow people through, or you're going to have to really reevaluate whether the current scheme is going to carry you there. And I foreshadowed this early in the video. Michigan has made a lot of hay by leaning on Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards in that run game and then trying to throw or be more explosive around it. And we talked about all last year, look, if you're a team that depends upon the run for explosive plays, it's not consistent. It can be shut down. The best defensive teams will shut down the run. Georgia in recent years has shut down the run. We've seen it every single year. You know, the year Derrick Henry won the Heisman Trophy, I think he had one touchdown early in that game against Clemson and what was kind of an all-timer national title game. And then it was all passing the rest of the way. I mean, Clemson had to adjust to stop Derrick Henry, and it strained them. But that's the point. All the running game did was strain the defense. But a team that can make the national title game, they're going to be able to stop the run. Now, they may compromise in other ways, but it's going to be your ability to exploit that, how they've compromised that really matters. And so if you're Michigan, can you beat Georgia? Because Georgia's leaned on the run game for the past couple of years, but their run game has been so brutal and the running back core so deep and the offensive line so deep. And again, their defense has been so suffocating that they just put a ton of pressure on you. But the big key with them is that Stetson Bennett was an uber efficient passer. They kept moving the ball. They kept getting first downs. And if you lean to stop the run, they would just eat you apart going down the field and score. And the couple games, like the national title game in particular against Alabama, where the run wasn't working that great, the defense was so good that they could stay in the game until late. And they hit a couple deep passes late in the game to win the game. That's where Michigan's got to be. And so you got to question, do you have the roster to do that? Can you play this style of football with this roster and this development scheme and not just win the conference, which they've proven they can do, but actually win a game or two in the playoff, which is a whole other degree of difficulty, which I think Michigan fans appreciate now. And to that extent, too, there's a lot of hurdles, right? And we talked about the fact that the last couple of years, I think it's been the pass rush for Michigan that's given them an edge. Well, this year, we're going to see that tested again. You lose Mike Morris, you lose Oki, and suddenly you got to rebuild a little bit. And those pass rushers, has the development been good enough that you can do that? Has the development been good enough in the secondary that you're going to continue to hold up? And then again, not just hold up, but take another step forward. Not have the kind of result you had against TCU. Not let a team throw the ball down the field in a playoff scenario. So there's a lot of stuff going against Michigan, I think, from the public, a lot of which is unfair. We talk about all the time. People always say they want to be in the playoff, but the worst thing is to be in the playoff and lose. Because, Cincinnati got a ton of hype until they played Alabama and then looked like a second-tier program because of the lack of physicality against a true elite. Michigan's been the team that actually had to play in the playoffs. They actually had to play Georgia. They've had to play TCU in a game they easily could have won. They get a lot of negativity where a team like Texas would have gotten blown out in the playoffs doesn't get because they didn't end up in that situation. So, it was the same conversation we had with Oklahoma fans a few years ago, which funnily enough is more an offensive team. But is it good to you if you're just making the playoffs every year and then you're losing by considerable margins, but winning your conference? Is that where you want to be? Or do you want to take that next step forward and be a real somebody that's really vying for the national title? Because that's a big step. It invariably requires a much more talented roster, a much deeper roster. It requires a bit of a different approach. You got to be a lot more complete offensively and defensively because there's always somebody that's really, really, really good. And a lot of times multiple teams at a different level than anybody you're going to play in conference. So that's the question for Michigan. It's the difficulty for Michigan. And it's the thing, I don't know. I mean, it's the thing I guess we're trying to project now, or we're trying to make a guess. So where do you think they're at in that scale? Do you think they should be trying to get there, and do you think they are there?
Well, and I think just one note, because it's a very good point. Georgia was seen as this rushing team, but Stetson Bennett was tied for third among Power 5 quarterbacks in yards per attempt, and he could put up a 350 spot where he needed to. And against Ohio State in that first round of the playoffs, he had to. They had to win on his arm. And I think that Michigan showed that they could do that again last year. And the defense just kind of let them down. But like you said, that was a very close game, and we don't know what happens in the second game when the team that's talented as Michigan, Georgia has to play them, the next week instead of a team that they could just overpower. The Vegas win total right now is 10.5 for Michigan, same for Ohio State. I'm going over on this. Michigan could lose one of those last 3 games of the season and still hit this 10.5, and their schedule just is not. It's not particularly challenging, in my opinion. I don't think that Michigan State's going to be great this year. Minnesota was like a 9-4 team last year, but when you look at that sounds good. But when you look at the fact that they played one team from the East, and that was Penn State, and they lost 45-17 or something like that, they've got a good record, but it's because of the division they play in, like some of the SEC East teams we've seen in the past. So 10.5 when they might not play a ranked team until November 11th. I think it's pretty safe that I'm picking them over. And I think that winning a playoff game is going to be contingent upon, one, if some of the new faces can make that transition or maturation and get comfortable, but two, the draw they get in the first round. Not necessarily just how good that other team is, but the style that they play and whether they can adapt accordingly. I think it's a little unfair to look at Harbaugh's postseason record and just kind of roll it up generically and say, they suck in the postseason, because I don't think that's true. I liked that TCU team last year, so I'm not killing Michigan for losing that game. And that game could have gone either way. But at least in the short term, if we're picking regular season, 10.5, I'm taking over.
I think I'd also take over. Now, I'm already on record, so I got to keep that record. I think more likely than not, Ohio State wins the conference. But be clear, I'm pretty split on that. And right now, I'm just trying to blindly guess in the dark. I give a lot of benefit to the doubt at this point to Harbaugh and his squad. He's shown the ability to rebuild his roster, and that always comes down to how well you coach guys developmentally at depth, right? You see a lot of guys that are great with starters that don't do a good job of training the backups. Bobby Petrino's a guy that comes to mind. Everybody talks about how great a coach he is, but look at his last years at Louisville. Look at what happened when he left at Arkansas, and he had a lot of attrition, a lot of guys graduating when he left there. His backups never had a clue what they were doing. He took a bunch of freshmen, played them for 4 years, got them really good as starters, and they'd have a great team as a senior, and then they would implode. Harbaugh's not going to do that, and you pay for it a little on the front end because you're not putting as much effort into like building an innovative scheme and getting those starters tons of reps, but his team through its depth is just better prepared and coached, and it starts showing up when those guys develop as juniors and seniors. That's when you get into the territory of the Georgias and the Alabamas and getting the benefit of the doubt. But it's a weird schedule because the top 5 teams in odds to win the Big Ten are Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Penn State, and Iowa. You dodge Wisconsin and Iowa, but you end the year with Ohio State and Penn State. So on one hand, it's kind of an easy schedule as much as you can be an easy schedule. It is to get to 10 wins. I mean, you're only playing 2 teams, 2 of the other 5 teams in the top 5 in the Big Ten, and you don't play anyone of note out of conference. But you can lose one game very easily at the end of the year and not win the Big Ten. And especially if you lose to Ohio State can lose another game and then win the tiebreaker and they win the Big Ten. It's kind of the Big Ten East and the SEC West have the same problem now same problem really that I will say the SEC West really used to have, which is you got 3 great teams and they're all in the same division. And so all that matters is what team wins one game is often going to determine who ends up in the playoff, even though the team that loses that game, 1, might have been the better team, and 2, is probably better than the 3rd and 4th best teams in the country. It just matters who wins that one game, and depending on what other conferences do, you may not get a second chance. Happened last year, happened to the SEC West in 2011. Deserved to happen last year, same way it deserved to happen to the SEC West in 2011. But yeah, I'll go over, but at the same time, it's crazy to say. I think 11-1 is 11-1 and losing to Ohio State and not winning the Big Ten. But that's just the difficulty of the schedule, just being the way it is and having the best teams, really some of the best teams in the country, if not the best teams in the country, all being in the same division. It's not fair.
All right, y'all. That's it for kind of this week's discussion, including a Michigan semi-preview. Let us know in the comments what you think about Michigan's 10.5 win over under. Are you taking that over? Are you taking that under? And maybe who you think is going to win that Big Ten East. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.